This week we are looking at Chapter 8 in our textbook, North textbook, and then also we're looking at Part 3 of the Chicano movement. So this is really where those two books collide, is in Chapter 8 and in Part 3. So the Chicano movement, it's one of my favorite things to teach about because it's one of those that's so often overlooked in just like your mainstream history classes. So I spend a lot of time in my other classes going over this and reinforcing the Chicano movement and how it kind of went hand in hand with the African American movement and also the American Indian movement. But we see in the 60s and 70s, those are decades of dramatic social change in the United States. And we see this shift and we start to see like a lot of protesting against the government because we lose faith and we lose trust in the government. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, go back and kind of like Google what happened during the Vietnam War and how did Americans lose faith in the government, and it will give you like a short summary of how that happened. But across the country, a lot of diverse groups are also starting to fight for their civil rights and equality. You've got the African American movement. We've all heard of the African American civil rights movement. You've got women that are starting to, we have like the second and third wave feminism that is happening. You've got Native Americans that are fighting for their rights. And then also members of the LGBTQ community. And among all of these groups, you have the Chicanos. So Americans of Mexican descent who began to reclaim their cultural identity and fight against decades of discrimination, economic exploitation, and political marginalization. And the Chicano movement became both a civil rights struggle and a cultural awakening that helped reshape Mexican American life in the United States. And there's some probably really familiar names as you're looking over this chapter that you've already been introduced to in the Chicano movement book. But also just kind of reiterated here. So you've got two leaders, and I want to point out there's actually, like, Chavez is not by himself. You also have Dolores Huerta that's working with him as well. But she's often overlooked because she's working more in the background. That's kind of how we remember her in history, but she's very present. She's there. She's doing the same work. You also have Tia Rena. And all of these people, and you've learned about so many more in the book, but they're really symbolize the struggle for justice in different ways. And you also know that Chavez is a farm worker from Arizona, and he used nonviolent protest just like Martin Luther King Jr. did. And he's organizing labor to improve working conditions for agricultural laborers throughout the United States and really working through the United Farm Workers. And his efforts, again, they're inspired by MLK, and he united workers across U.S. and Mexico. And really, he becomes the face of the Chicano movement. Tia Rena, he is a preacher. He is from Texas. Let's see if I have a picture of him. And there's Chavez. And he focused on the loss of land grants in New Mexico that have been taken from Hispanic families in violation of the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo at the end of the Mexican-American War, and that treaty came out in 1848. And though his efforts were not as successful, he connected historical injustices to ongoing violations of civil rights and further activism. We also have the urban movement. There we go. And, you know, while Chavez and Tia Rena are fighting the rural battles, a new generation of urban students, people living in cities, they're going to emerge, and they're going to be protesting educational inequality, racist curricula, and limited opportunities for Mexican American youth. And so you have movements like MECHA, which we've got chapters in our high schools, we've got chapters at PC. They called for a culturally relevant education to end institutional racism. And you have activists such as Corky Gonzalez, who's also mentioned in the Chicano book. He advanced ideas of Chicano unity and identity, declaring that all people of Mexican descent in the U.S. shared a common heritage and purpose. And then moving on just a little bit more, like what else is happening like outside of these groups. We have the urban struggle extended to the community in organizing and political activism. And you have like big groups, like La Raza and the Mexican American Youth Organization. They're really pushing for self-determination and political representation. And protests such as the one that happened in 1970 really brought a lot of attention to police brutality and the disproportionate number of Chicanos dying in the Vietnam War. Activists also debated how to define their identity, whether as culturally distinct Chicanos or as part of a broader Mexican nation. So you have organizations like CASA and CCR took more radical stances calling for solidarity with revolutionary movements across Latin America. We're also going to see something happening in the middle class. And not all Chicanos embraced revolutionary politics. There was a growing Mexican-American middle class, and they sought to change through legal reform and community development rather than confrontation, rather than being like military and like militant and fighting. And so you see programs like Project SIR or SER, the Mexican American Legal Defense and Education Fund, and others that are going to help expand employment, education, civil rights protections. And you do have several court cases, like there's one that comes out of Corpus Christi, recognizing Mexican Americans as a distinct ethnic group under civil rights law. The movement also challenged institutions like the Catholic Church, which a lot of Chicanos felt the Catholic Church was ignoring social inequality. And so you do have distinct figures. There's one who's known as the tortilla priest, who worked with the United Farm Workers to link faith and activism. Also, Chicano women played vital but often under-recognized roles. And you have people like Huerta, who co-founded the United Farm Workers, and gave voice to women's concerns, including gender equality, reproductive rights, access to education, and opposition to patriarchal traditions within both Chicano culture and the church. There's also a cultural and artistic renaissance that's going to take place, and it's going to spark. There we go. It's going to spark this. The Chicano movement helps us spark a cultural renaissance in art, literature, and performance. And you've got a group founded by Luis Valdez, and he and his group, they use theater to dramatize farm worker struggles and inspire community activism. You're also going to see murals, music, and dance celebrating Mexican heritage while addressing issues of identity and resistance. And writers like Jorge Gonzalez with his very famous poem, I Am Joaquin. And novelists like Rudolfo Anaya, author of Bless Me, Ultima, use literature to express cultural pride in the Chicano quest for justice and self-discovery. And, you know, Phoenix is one of those places where you do see a lot of like Mexican Chicano pride along with American Indian pride. You see a lot of murals and a lot of that artistic expression that started in the 60s and 70s. We still see it here today. And you even see some like modern updates of those murals being done today throughout the greater Phoenix area. And, you know, just like as Mexican Americans migrated beyond the Southwest in search of opportunity, they formed new communities and really trying to maintain their cultural traditions while adapting to these new environments outside of the Southwest. Whether through social clubs, churches, or labor unions, these communities really help to preserve a sense of belonging and a sense of unity. So it's not a single organization or ideology, it's a very multifaceted struggle for dignity, equality, and cultural pride is what we're going to see in the Chicano movement. And it redefined what it meant to be Mexican American. It left a lasting legacy in education, politics, labor rights, and the arts that we still see today in 2025 and beyond. But reclaiming, you know, Aztlán as both a mythic homeland and a symbol of unity, Chicanos created a powerful vision of identity and empowerment that continues to influence American society today. And that's what you're going to learn about. And the crossover from both of these books really taking place now as we're like ending. We're getting towards the latter half of both books now, but you'll see that crossover and you'll kind of see them complementing each other more as we move throughout the rest of the semester.